It's a little bit cleaner than it was last week, but I'm still using other things to be a little distracted before I start a significant painting. So what I decided to do is I made a little wet into wet sunset that I thought is going to be great for a little easy short, which I'll show you in a second. But I also grabbed one of my other paintings and I thought I would show you how I'm going to create just a little more depth. It's just a shorty, and let's go ahead and take a look. Okay, I'm going to get this ready for you. Right through there. And I'm going to explain to you some of the things that I was thinking about with this. Okay, now this was actually a lesson. It was painted this way horizontally, and the idea was how to show people how to do negative painting and also retain the white of the flowers. Now, it wasn't meant to be anything significant, but I think what we can do with this is actually show you how to push this one back, pull this forward. The composition isn't great, but it serves its purpose because what I wanted to do is show people how to sculpt a flower and using a quarter sheet of paper. So you can really just make circles and do the same basic thing with this. So what I'm doing is rotating this around so I can decide what do I want to do. And in order for you to see it in this vertical format, I have to turn this vertically. So what the exercise really conveys is how to do a wet in the wet, wet into wet in the background to create the illusion of some twigs back here or a lighter space back here. This is only like maybe one or two layers, so it doesn't really have a lot of depth. And then with the flower, there really isn't any shaping in here. There's no detail. It's big spaces. But the easy thing to show you is I'm going to push this back and maybe I'll glaze over the background and add a little bit of detail, or maybe not detail, but some shaping right there. So in the palette, let's take a look at that. I'm going to start with a number 20 blend brush. And why I want a blend brush is because it's going to hold a generous amount of water and color. If I used a synthetic brush, I could easily drag my brush across the surface. So I'm going to take a little bit of my French ultramarine blue. You can see the amount of water I have, and a little bit of my burnt sienna. Now this is a little too watery, so I'm going to take the water, leave it in that part right down here, and pull up some of the color in this area so I can make a stronger ratio. I don't need much. Basically, what I want to do is show you how to push this back. Okay, maybe that'll be a better way for you to see it. And also notice how I'm holding the brush. I'm going to go along this edge right through here, and I'm also supporting my hand. That way I can have more control over my stroke. And I'll pull this out a little bit more. Then using a number 30 blend brush, I'm going to get water on here, remove the extra water if I can find a towel. And then I don't want this to all be so dark. I'm going to add a little more water and press a little harder. I don't want to create a halo. I'm going to pull this up because the idea is that I want to push this back. The light contrast here will pull forward. I'm not going to worry about any of that background color bleeding into the flower because the point is to push that area back. So that's pretty much all I need to do for this. Now, if I wanted to get a little more shape in here, I'll use some of the same color and do the same thing. And if I want to push this back, I'm using the same French ultramarine blue burnt sienna blend and do that. And we don't want that to create a halo, or a lot of times people will have a very thick, hard line around the edges. That's because your water and color is accumulating in that area. So how you're going to handle that is lift your paper up and allow that water and color to move back away from the edges. All right, so I'm pretty pleased with that idea, but I'm going to go ahead, use that same color blend, and I'm going to just kind of shape these. And when I paint, I rotate my painting all the way around. That way I balance my, my composition. And like I said, this is not a perfect composition at all, and that's because these are fairly similar in size, and it's not a good use of the paper, but it's a good one for me to experiment with and for people to get an idea of how to work with their techniques. So what I just did here is come back in on top of the color that I've already applied, and I'm going to soften a few of these edges. I don't want to go on top. I'm going to go along the side. I don't need to soften everything. And I was using a 14. I can use an 8. If I use an 8, I'm going to have smaller brush strokes. So I'm thinking here's the center of the flower. I'm going to work from the inside out, or I can work from the outside in. I want you to see that I don't need to be that careful. Then I'm going to take the 20, dip it in the water, remove some of the extra water, and soften some of the edges. Now I noticed I was just going a little too slow over here and thinking too much, and that's not what I want to do. Okay. This is not about creating a masterpiece. This is working with technique. Now these two, we can't really see this petal here. I could go a little darker down here, so I'll do that. Then take that 20, remove the extra water. I'm not wringing it out, I'm just softening some of those edges and removing some of the excess water. Now I could leave it like this. I'll think about it for a second. I don't want that line to stay like that, so I'm going to soften a little bit there and here. Now if I use a number 8, I'm going to have a smaller stroke, which is fine. So if we look at this area here and here, this was wet on dry, and then I pulled the color out with water. Now I can't really do any of this here because it's too wet. This area was dry, so I can go ahead and create that effect right here. In fact, I really like that. If I came in this area, I'm going to show you what happens. You see, it's just going to dissipate, and it's okay if I want it to be more in the shade, but it doesn't give me any contrast or any kind of detail. So I'm happy with that. Let's add a little more detail right up here. So we're basically problem solving. Now, if I wanted this to stand out, I can go ahead and go darker in the background. I could be more thoughtful in what I want to do with my background. I could try to do a little negative painting here and try to pull out some other flowers. I could create them. Let's give that a try. So I was actually just going to glaze all over this, but I want to take advantage of this area that has that lighter shape. And I think I'm going to go into a indigo because that's darker. I could use a perylene green. I'll incorporate that into it. This has a lot of water. In fact, it's almost too much. It's too much water. And then let's go ahead and try to find a flower in here. So I'm doing a little negative painting. Wet on dry. I'm going to just try to get the idea of a petal in here. So not every painting needs to be a masterpiece. Now I could use my 20 to soften this one, but I think I'm going to use my 30. Remove the extra water. And I could, if I wanted to be more detailed and deliberate, I would sit down and take my time, but I'm really pretty much flying through this. And I'm going to go ahead and soften this. So now we have a nice transition of light through dark up here. And if I wanted, I could leave those lines, but that could end up competing with the flower. Let's take a look at it this way. So if I wanted to add more detail into it, I could add a center into it. And then once that's dry, I could come back in and glaze over it. And then I would have these soft edges. But for now, I think what I'm going to do is take my 30, remove the extra water, and just soften this edge, just like I did in the center of the flower. I don't want to release water. I just want to soften that edge right through here. And then I can decide if I wanted to do anything else with that at another time. And then over here, I could come back in and go a little darker. So basically what I'm thinking about is just showing you the techniques, wet on wet, wet on dry, pushing areas back, working with negative painting. And we can always change the composition. We could crop it down. We could make it much more interesting. But this is what we're doing, just working what we have with what we have here. Now, I like this, but I'm going to push this back. And by pushing it back means I want that light area to pull forward, this area to fall back, and I'm standing up, so I might have more wiggly lines. If I'm sitting down, I'll be more controlled. I'm going to soften. Let's take a look at this. And then I'll just soften this here. Now, if I want to create more branches in here or have those stand out, let's look at that. I'm going to go back to my palette for a second. Take my number 8 or whatever appropriate size brush I think I need. And what I want is less water right here. You can see that doesn't move the same way this does down here. And then I'm going to go wet on dry. I could also use a synthetic brush, blend or synthetic. And by having not as much water on the brush, or not as much water in the water to color ratio, it's not going to just spread out as much. So this is basically a wet into wet, but the surface is dulling down. Okay. Let's see what we think. So, you know, it's just fine. This is just taking an old painting that I have. And if I wanted to do negative painting in the center, I'm looking at this here. I was just going to put some spots in there. I could go ahead and just, oops, that's wet, so I can't do that. I'll do it right here. Maybe make a few little circles. Okay, so my negative painting, the light area is going to be the center, and then I'll just go a little darker on the outside of those circles. Take my number 8 and just kind of tie those other areas together. And I could always spend more time on this, but that's basically the idea. And let's see. I'm looking for a mat. I could always do a lot more to this, but I just wanted you to see what you can do with paintings that may be problematic. There is more I can do, but you get the idea. Now, what I'm also doing and what I've done here, I don't know when I'm going to post it, maybe today, is just working with a wet into wet in the background like that to create a very simple little landscape or sunset that can easily be applied to a landscape. Now, I like this. I could continue to add more or be more thoughtful in the design and the shape that I want to do, but this really accomplishes everything that I wanted to show you today. So let's go back here. Oops, go right here. And that's it. So if you're interested and if you like this, let me know. And it's a great way for me to distract myself before I actually plunge into a painting that I really want to do. So until next time, have fun and happy painting. No? Let's figure this out and I'll turn it off. Thanks so much.